They go to bed in kind of like a tiff. Jane wakes up next to a horse.
Welcome to Keep It Fictional, a weekly podcast for book lovers by book lovers. Build your to-be-read list with Sadie, Liz, Virginia, Fiona, and Corene from the Port Moody Public Library. Warning, this podcast contains strong opinions and may cause an increase in your library holds list.
1 is the loneliest number you could ever do. But 2 can be as bad as 1. It's the loneliest number since the number 1. Welcome to all of my book friends to Keep It Fictional, the book podcast for book lovers by book lovers from the Port Moody Public Library. Today, we are not alone. We are joined in communion and conversation about a topic that was surprisingly difficult to search for in Bibliocommons. Today, we mostly think of writing as like a solo endeavor. The writer in their like little writer's cap in the attic, late at night, scribbling away in like a fit of genius and passion, working on their magnus opus alone. We think of writing as primarily a solitary endeavor, something that someone does by themselves, kind of pouring their souls out onto the page. But in some very special and apparently very rare from, when I was running through the stacks trying to find a book for this topic, occasionally they bring a friend. Our topic today is co-written novels or books. So that's books written by not just a single voice, but maybe 2 or 3 voices working in tandem to create a single story. So I'm very curious for my book friends, was this a difficult topic to find a book for?
I definitely changed books often. I started thinking I was going to do one, and then I was like, no, that's too long and I don't feel like reading it this week. And then I tried another, but it's hard to look up books about it. I would Google books with 2 authors and find just a bunch of kind of what looked like pulp books from the 60s that just probably weren't that good. And I was like, no. There was one book that I know off the top of my head that I really wanted to do, but it's been talked about before. So it was a little difficult to find something.
Was it Good Omens? Because that was my go-to book for this topic.
No. So that was the first one I was going to do. But then I was like, it's 400 plus pages. I don't feel like reading that this week because I haven't read it before. The one that I wanted to do was This Is How You Lose the Time War. But Liz talked about it in a previous episode, I think on novellas. But yeah, that one, for co-authored books, that's one that I really, really loved. But it's got those alternating perspectives. So each author has their own distinct chapters that they do.
Yeah, and I feel like that kind of really lends itself to a co-author strategy, I guess, is that one takes one character and that, they go back and forth on them. But yeah, in Good Omens, you can't tell who wrote which bits. And at this point, they don't remember who wrote which bits because you go in and edit each other's. But I think that kind of round robin style of writing is very popular for that. Sadie, was it hard for you to find a book for that?
Honestly, no. I also did the Googling strategy. And I don't know, just one of the first things that came up was one I'm like, yeah, I could read that. Give it a try. It was a new book. It was a mystery, which I was kind of in the mood for a mystery. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to give it a try. So I kind of got it in one. I know. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to rack my brain around, if it's the book that I think about it, is it a mother-son duo?
No, it's not. So it's 2 Canadian authors who I was not familiar with either of them. They both have written a few books before. One kind of writes chick lit kind of things. And then one is a journalist and focuses a lot on writing feminist works. And a lot of her journalism has been centered around gender equality. But yeah, they decided to team up. I don't know if they seem to be friends from before they wrote this book. Seems to be friends now as well. So the process must have gone not too bad. But yeah, no.
Very interesting, especially with a mystery book where you really do need a very cohesive narrative. That's very interesting to kind of share that between 2 people.
Yeah. And I don't know, they talked about kind of working on outlines and things like that. And that was sort of how they were able to figure out who was going to write which and kind of co-write the book. I don't know what parts of the book each one of them wrote, and I'm not familiar enough with either of them individually to be able to kind of pinpoint it. But yeah, it's interesting. I always find it interesting when people co-write books and just how they figure it out.
Interesting. All right, Virginia, was it difficult to find a book that would fit your specifications of what you want to read about, written by two people?
See, that's exactly what it is, right? Because there is lots. I mean, like James Patterson and everybody. Like, I don't know why. Like, I don't know why we didn't see. Like, if the James Patterson, Michael Crichton one was in, I would have got that one because I would like to know how he collaborated with a ghost. So, but that wasn't in. The other one I was like thinking of right away was of course, the best collaboration of this year, which would be Keanu Reeves and China Miel. But like, it wasn't out until end of July, and I'm like, I feel like I shouldn't, review that so soon. So I did not. But yeah, like, and then I thought about a lot of YA books, and I was kind of like, there's a lot of opportunities there too. So there's a few that I was going to go with, but I didn't. So it's kind of like Emma and Sadie. I think like, saying like I keep switching books one and after another. I'm like, so like I landed on something that was not on my list at all. So
I'm still deciding at this very moment which book I'm going to talk about. And it is funny, like how some genres kind of lend themselves more to this. Like you don't see a ton of literary fiction that's co-authored. I don't see a ton of mystery stuff other than James Patterson, which I'm dying to know about that collaboration process. Like, did he have like a Ouija board out and was like, Michael, what happens in chapter 2? Yeah, like certain genres. I feel like YA, there's a lot of it. A lot of it. So a ton of the stuff that I saw on the list was YA books. And one of the books that I'm considering talking about, and we'll see what happens in 20 minutes, is a YA book. And I don't know why that particular like community of writers is just more apt to collaborate that way. Sadie, as our resident YA expert, do you have any insight?
Maybe to give each other a boost and to support each other. I don't know. Because they've all written so much on their own that it's time for them to work together.
Yeah. And I feel like there's real standouts. Like Emma, you said like This Is How We Win the Time War, which was like a huge blockbuster book, and Good Omens, like written by two kind of like fairly like established authors who just decide to collaborate on something. But there's definitely like a lot of genres where you don't see that. Other than, of course, our man, J. Pats, James Patterson. And again, we don't know the details of how that collaboration, and I'm going to put some like air quotes on that collaboration works. So yeah, I think he's the only one that I could, that was, oh, dang it, Virginia. That's what I should have done. That's what I should have done. Because he collaborates with some like truly amazing people. And I would have loved to read his book with Dolly Parton. I messed up. Anyways, so in the spirit of collaboration, we are now going to send it over to a solo endeavor, which is Sadie talking about her book all by herself. See, we should have had like both of us read the book and then we could have like talked about it together, but no, too bad.
Missed opportunities next time. All right. Well, I don't actually read a lot of co-written books, maybe because there's not a lot out there, but maybe they don't really come across my radar all that often. So as I said, I did take to Google to find a book for this one. And the one that came up is called Bury the Lead, a Quill and Packet mystery. Came out in March. It is a Canadian book just released by Kate Hilton and Elizabeth Renzetti. And as I mentioned, both Hilton and Renzetti do have some published books to their names. This is the first mystery book for both of them. And they kind of started the process during the pandemic when they said they were both looking for something fun to kind of distract them from what was happening. And so they decided to focus on a cozy mystery with a nice Canadian setting, but something that tackles some very real and relevant topics. So our story takes place in cottage country in Ontario in the town of Port Ellis, and it follows journalist Kat Conway. Now, Kat remembers Port Ellis from when she would come for the summers as a teenager and stay with her grandparents. However, she never expected that she would return as an adult, 45 years old, divorced, with a teenage son who wants nothing to do with her, and her high-profile journalistic career in shambles. But here she is, working at the Port Ellis Quill and Packet newspaper and living above the pub, where she picks up extra shifts when she needs a bit of a financial boost. Now, Port Ellis is kind of your typical holiday town. It's filled with large vacation houses, lots of tourists in the summer, known for its active theater scene, and its century-old feud between two of the most prominent and wealthy families in the area, one of which is now Kat's new boss. So Kat's first assignment is to interview actor Elliot Fraser. Fraser is starring in the Port Ellis Playhouse summer mainstage production of Inherit the Wind. And the first time that Fraser graced the stage of the Playhouse was more than 30 years earlier, when he was a young, talented, and rather conceited actor. And it's pretty clear that not everyone is happy to see him back. Now, it doesn't take Kat long to figure out that Elliot's reputation for being a bit of a sleaze is definitely accurate, but also a much watered-down way to describe the philandering, creepy, and honestly quite abusive man who is sitting in front of her. But Kat smiles and nods through the interview, interjecting compliments at the right moment to keep Fraser talking about his illustrious acting career. But Kat is more than happy to make a quick escape when the interview is over. Fraser's interview is the first in a series that Kat is planning for the summer. Each one will be highlighting a different member of the cast. This includes Jonah Tiller, who is a contemporary of Elliot Fraser and one who has kind of butt heads with Elliot in the past, and also including a young up-and-coming and locally born actor who happens to be the son of the pub owner and Kat's landlady. So a few nights later, Kat and the rest of the Quill and Packet team arrive at the Playhouse for opening night. They mingle, they eventually make their way to their seats in time for the opening curtain, and the show starts. The show opens with Elliot Fraser being live broadcasted from his dressing room. This is all planned, this is part of the show, but very soon after the curtain rises, it's pretty clear that what is happening is not actually part of the production. Elliot starts gasping for air, his face turning red and panic filling his eyes. Kat is quick to realize that this is no acting, and she rushes backstage to Elliot's dressing room to help. She calls for someone to call 911 as she goes, and when she arrives, Elliot is dead. The death throws the small town of Port Ellis into chaos, as it is descended upon by big city journalists and TV reporters. And while it has not yet been confirmed, Kat is convinced that Elliot's death was in no way natural, and she is now determined to figure out who the murderer is. There are many likely suspects. Jonah Tiller, Elliot's castmate, who has hated Elliot ever since he stole the role of Hamlet from him. Martha Mercer, Elliot's ex-wife and chair of the Port Ellis Playhouse Board of Directors. Glenda, the local bakery owner who refused Elliot's advances, and so in return, he got her contract with the Playhouse canceled. Hadia, Elliot's memoir writer and somewhat assistant, or any number of women who Elliot has abused throughout his time at the Port Ellis Playhouse. Kat isn't sure who it is, but she knows she can figure it out. So with the help of her Quill and Packet colleagues, she starts to dig into Elliot and the town of Port Ellis's past to see who may want this honestly horrible man dead. However, just as Kat feels like she's getting close to discovering something, she starts receiving some very clear and very threatening signs that she should back off. Her car windows get smashed in, her apartment gets ransacked, and a warning is scrawled across the wall telling her to stop investigating. She's even run off the road in the middle of the night. But despite these warnings, Kat is determined to keep investigating, to find out what exactly Elliot did in his past and why it has led to his murder, and who else in town may have been involved. And, if she's able to redeem herself and her reputation just a little bit in the process, well, Kat's okay with that too. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. On the surface, it's a cozy, kind of fun mystery. It's about a woman who's trying to figure out where her life is, trying to get back on track. It has a lot of great, quirky side characters. They were fun to read. I think that because of my background, I really enjoyed the theatrical aspects of it. Since I spent most of my summers as a teenager in the theater, it definitely brought back some wonderful memories of performing on stage and spending summers in theater. However, you don't need to have an intimate knowledge of the theater to understand the story or to kind of get into the story. Elizabeth Renzetti, as I mentioned, is a journalist herself, and most of her prior work is focused around gender equality and feminism. And so it makes sense that this novel also kind of centers around those themes. As the story goes on, we learn that the demise of Kat's career before moving to Port Ellis involved her being verbally abused because she was a woman in her line of work and her deciding to take a stand against her abusers. The theme of abuse, and mainly sexual abuse, is also very prevalent in the main storyline. And I think that Renzetti and Hilton do a pretty good job of drawing attention to an issue that is, I think, so common, especially in the entertainment business, and yet has only just recently been more openly talked about. And I think that it is something that needs to be spoken about more. And so I applaud them for kind of including that aspect, even though it at times is not easy to read about, kind of some of the experiences that some of the women have in this book. I think that I wasn't entirely happy with who the murderer turned out to be. I think that apart from that, though, it was a quick, kind of fun, cozy read. It has a hint of something deeper. So if you are looking for a kind of a nice, cozy mystery, something with a bit of a Canadian feel to it, it is very CanCon. So if you are looking for that, but if you like cozy mysteries, or if you just kind of like mysteries in general, then I think that this would be a good one. So this is Bury the Lead by Kate Hilton and Elizabeth Renzetti.
Interesting. So did you have someone that you really wanted to be the murderer and you're like, it should have been Bob?
Not necessarily. And I can't really explain why without giving it away for anyone who would like to read it. But it kind of bugged me a little bit, the direction that they went in with it.
Was it a child?
No, it was not a child.
You make that face, Virginia.
It's not The Simpsons.
Yeah, 100%. It was The Simpsons. But there's also episodes of like Midsummer Murder, which like all mystery books stem from these days, where one of them is actually just a child with a crossbow. And you're like, yeah, every child can use a crossbow, but will they? Yeah. So as long as it wasn't a child, I'm kind of curious now. I'm kind of curious. All right. Well, we are going to throw it over to Virginia to see what co-authored book you managed to track down.
Well, as we always say, it always benefits to come to the library and browse around the stacks because you never know what treasure you're going to find. And that's how I discovered my book for today when I was pulling books for the display for the library. And I saw this book that has 2 authors. And I'm like, hey, I need one of those for the podcast. And so I got that one and I was like taking a look at it. And I have to say, the blurb didn't immediately draw me in. I wasn't sure about the subject, but the book did come with some ringing endorsements from other authors like Katie Kitamura and Alexander Chee. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe. And then when I looked it up, it turns out that this book has appeared on so many best books lists in 2023. And apparently everybody has read and loved the book, and it just wasn't on my radar at all. So, but I read it now, so I can catch up. And the book is called Dayswork by Chris Bachelder and also Jennifer Habel. And as Corene pointed out, maybe fewer kind of literary fiction collaboration, but this is one of those. And both our authors are new to me. Chris Bachelder is a National Book Award nominee, and then Jenny Habel is an award-winning poet. And I've not read anything by them. And they are married, and they decide, sort of similar to Sadie's book, they decide to write a book together during COVID, which is also the other reason why I was hesitant to read it, because I don't know about my book friends and listeners out there, but I don't think I'm quite ready to read a book set during the pandemic just yet. It's just not really what I wanted. I know a lot of books that we're reading right now are probably written during the pandemic, but I don't know if I want one set in that time. So that's why I was like a little bit hesitant. But I'm very glad that I did read it, because I feel like this is probably one of the more unique reading experiences that I have had this year. So I'm glad that to discover this book. Dayswork is set during the pandemic, as I mentioned. Our unnamed narrator is stuck at home like everyone else with her family, her husband and her 2 daughters. And while her daughters are going to school over Zoom in the next room, she is doing research, maybe a little bit obsessively, but like, what else are you going to do during the pandemic, on the life of Herman Melville. Herman Melville, of course, considered to be one of the greatest American writers, author of Moby Dick, among others. And I have to say, I have not read any Melville. My classics literature background is more on the British side, and I was never really got into the American literature, so I've never read Melville before. But like me, even if you have not read the source material, I'm sure you are familiar probably with the story of Moby Dick in general, or have seen like parodies in like kids' cartoons. And so without that, you probably are still aware of like who he is. Our narrator is trying to piece together his story, and there's just so much out there. And that's kind of what this book is. And I think maybe because Jennifer Habel is a poet, a lot of the paragraphs, they're all like maybe like 2-3 lines long. And so they're more like kind of poems instead of like prose, or kind of a prose poem thing, I guess. And what you get is all these snippets of what she discovered and what she read about as she's trying to learn what is the life story of Herman Melville. And it's often in the form of conversation between her and her husband as she tells him like what she found that day. And you get her husband comments or jokes about it. And then, it's these conversations and these thoughts that really form the book. And of course, it's not just randomly like scattered. It's arranged in a way so that you can get a narrative, not just about Melville, but also about the narrator and her family, among others. So there are, of course, a lot of excerpts from Melville's writings that you get. You get a lot of quotes from other people who know Melville, things they have to say about his character, or things they don't want to say, like his daughter who wants nothing to do with him. Letters that are written by and to Melville, scholars, researchers, and other fans of Melville, and all their words and all their praises. It's not uncommon when you have a single scholar who devote like thousands and thousands of pages just to this one author because he's so beloved by everybody. And you hear about their work, their research, and a lot of readers that are out there and what they think about Melville and how his work changed their lives. And of course, having the internet, and especially during the pandemic, when that's kind of your only source of information, the narrator talks about like visiting museums virtually and try to enlarge these like blurry photos to try to see the book that Melville has, or coming across a lot of screens telling her that she has reached her monthly limit of free articles and to subscribe now with all the things that she wants to learn about it. So as simple as just trying to figure out like how tall Melville is difficult. With his passport application, it said one thing, and then on the list of crew members on the ship that he was on, like it says something else. And then of course other people's description of how tall Melville is. So everything is quite like impossible because maybe it's a matter of having too many sources, or maybe there's just not enough. And it's the challenge of us doing research and trying to figure out the facts from fiction, realizing there's so many discrepancies for so many different reasons, typos, misinterpretations, wrong attributions, people's stories or their own like theories that get turned into facts and that gets sort of passed along. We all are aware of sort of all the things that, we get along with the internet. So piecing together sort of something definitive is definitely challenging for our narrator. And Dayswork is really, in a way, an ode to research. The book also asks the question, how many sacrifices have been made in the name of art, in the name of literature, and often, of course, in service of man and man only. Melville is famous for waking up his daughter up at 2 a.m. so that she could proofread what he just read, because he needs to do it right now. His wife, Elizabeth Shaw, is one of the main transcribers of his writing. She has done like pretty much like, copy his writing like so many times, hours and hours spent on this. Had to try to figure out his writing, his scribbles, and all the notes that he made changes, the changes that he made, that he put in the margins, things that he crossed out, and then things that he uncrossed. Trying to decipher all of that is her job. But who's paying attention to all these people? Who are paying attention to all the lives that have to be adjusted in the name of art? And it's interesting when the authors talk about their collaboration in this book, and they talk about writing this together in the pandemic, may have saved their marriage in some way, because they were talking about how there's no such thing as, well, I'm going to go right now, so you go take care of the kids. There's not, because they are both writing at the same time. They're both working on this together. And so it was interesting to talk about and then compare that with sort of what happened in the story to Melville and his family, to some of his biographers, Elizabeth Hartwick, for example, and her marriage and how much she had to sacrifice, to the narrator and her relationship with her family during this time. So a lot of those themes that sort of carry through. The other thing that the story also talks about is, can you separate a person from the art? Can you continue to like something knowing that the person who created it is maybe not a nice, very, very nice person? Melville is supposed to be quite abusive to his family. His wife's family wanted to get Elizabeth away from Melville and has this like elaborate plot to try to get her away because he's just not very nice to them. And they talk about a lot of like reprieve that his family got whenever he's away. So it sort of poses all these questions to us. The book includes a lot of passages, a lot of authors, a lot of writers who just love Melville and think that he's like the best. And not a lot of people are willing in some ways to acknowledge some of the other facts in his life that has sort of come to light. And of course, I don't know a lot of things about Melville, so it was interesting to kind of learn a little bit about him, even though like I don't really have particular interest in this person, but it's interesting to see, for example, that even though he's now considered to be the greatest author, like he was not successful during his lifetime at all. And he also wrote a very horrible book called Pierre, apparently, that is considered to be highly immoral during that time. And he also wrote a lot of poetry, which I also didn't know. And of course, the other things that like I think the most interesting thing is his infatuation with Nathaniel Hawthorne. I didn't know that I don't know. I mean, like maybe he's just very deeply in love with Hawthorne's mind, or maybe more. It's hard to tell. But one of the things when we're talking about how his wife had to transcribe everything, including one of the lines which he wrote as a review about Nathaniel Hawthorne's latest work, he said in the book, and this is a line that like she has a copy out, this Hawthorne expands and deepens down the more I contemplate him, and further shoots his strong New England roots into the hot soil of my southern soul. According to one of Melville's biographers, probably one of the two most erotically charged passages in 19th century American literature. So that was interesting to find all those like little snippets about Melville's life. And of course, all of those carries through in all the different people that the narrator mentioned and talk about. As we all readers know, it is probably one of the greatest joys in life when you come across a line and a passage that really perfectly puts into words a feeling and an emotion that helps you make sense of something that you're going through or something that you're trying to untangle and decipher and understand. And you just come across this perfect passage that like just explain to you what's happening to you kind of thing. And I think for any book, a reader is just as important to the book as the author. You know, we bring our experiences, we bring our points of references when we're reading and when we interact with a piece of a text or a piece of a story. And Dayswork is very much about that. It's a book about that power of the resonance that when we see ourselves in the books, in the stories, and how much that can change our life and how important it is, these words sometimes to everybody. And we all need some of that. Yeah, and very interesting book. Like I'm glad I read it. I never would have discovered that, you know, if I didn't have to look for like a book with two authors. A very interesting read. I have not fact-checked any of the things in here regarding Melville, but I'm sure there's a lot of stuff to sift through. So maybe one day I'll actually go and tackle one of his books. We'll see. So this book is Dayswork by Chris Bachelder and Jennifer.
I think you should read Pierre. I'm so curious about it. Like, how could it be worse than Moby Dick?
Oh, there's a lot of like weird stuff going on in that book. And they were just like, what the heck are you writing about? Yeah. So
can you imagine being his wife at like 2:00 in the morning? And he's like, I don't know what her name was. Mariette, wake up. It's time for you to transcribe my incest book that I've written. Couldn't wait like 4 hours. Like, the genius cannot be contained. What an insufferable. Anyways, that dovetails nicely into our existential question, which is, if you had to write a book with someone, if you had to sit down and write a book with someone, and it could either be, it doesn't have to be one of our book friends, it could be just like maybe someone you know, who would you choose to write a book with? Who would you choose to collaborate on pouring the poetry out of your soul?
I'm going to say my best friend, because we have written songs together. So I think that maybe we could work together on writing as well. So yeah, I'm going to say I give a shout out to my very best friend, Faith, who I didn't go to high school with, but we've known each other since we were 13 or so.
Virginia, could you write a book with your significant other?
No, I don't think so. No. I'll probably pick like a kid, some random kid, because I think it'd be really fun to get their random ideas and try to like put something together. I don't have anybody specific in mind. So random kid in the library.
You're just grabbing a child?
Yeah, just exactly. Yep.
Seems healthy. I think I would also go very random, because I feel like if you're writing it with someone that you know quite well, you would be so cognizant of like their feelings and you wouldn't want to step on toes. Whereas if it was just like a total stranger off the internet, you'd have no problem saying, well, this sucks, and try better.
I have no problem stepping on my friends' toes. They know this about me. They choose to be friends with me anyway. But I'd probably choose either my friend Charlie, the one who hate reads Colleen Hoover that I talked about last week, but just because like she's a good creative writer and I trust her judgment and I feel so comfortable with her that I could be like, dude, that sucks. Or my friend Lucas, who's a songwriter. So I feel like we could do some like wacky poetry stuff together. I would choose my significant other, but she likes to write romance, which is not for me.
All right. Well, thank you for answering that question. If anyone is looking for a co-author on anything, you can approach any of us in the library, especially if you're a small child. Virginia. Okay.
Well, they would be more fun, like, because they would just have like really really fun, interesting ideas, and I would love to see, like, they might also like illustrate it too, right? Like, so it would just like, yeah, got the whole package. So
Did you have to say that Evie will often get us to tell her just like made up stories, and so she will often contribute to those, and I will vouch for the fact that it is very fun to see what ideas she puts in. The cats are always pink, always pink.
It is. Kids do, and I know it's like a cliche, but they do come up with the wackiest stuff. Often sometimes in the middle of story time when you're telling a story and they just kind of tug on your pant leg and tell you the most unhinged thing you've ever heard. And you have to just be like, okay, moving on.
see, wouldn't you want to write about the crocodiles in the air, Corene? A story can just base on that, the crocodiles in the air that you can see. Come on.
Honestly, it was such an unnerving experience of the child just looking up. There are crocodiles in the air. I'd be like, ah, because it assumed that she could see them and I couldn't, which somehow makes it so much worse. On the other hand, great premise for like a horror novel, right? Like the invisible crocodiles in the sky.
I feel like it's akin to like Sharknado, kind of, with the crocodiles, kind of like, yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you for that. If there's any strange children that need an adult to co-author with them, just come and see Virginia at any time at the information desk. I have eventually landed on what book I'm going to talk about. And this was tough. The other one that I was going to talk about, it's actually two sisters that co-wrote it, and I cannot imagine that process. And because I wanted to go over and above, because I'm the fool that picked this topic, I'm actually going to choose a book with 3 authors, not 1, not 2, but 3, which as a process, I cannot imagine. And it is a premise that you wouldn't necessarily think of either. So if you know anything about the English monarchy, they like to switch it up sometimes, and they usually switch it up by chopping off someone's head. And then that's the end of that. In the history of the English monarchy, they have had several beheadings and several very tragic tales. However, none perhaps so tragic as the story of Lady Jane Grey, nicknamed the 9 Days Queen. I remember there was a Scholastic Book Fair book called The 9-Day Queen, with like her sitting with a book looking out the window all forlorn. And I was like, oh, that seems nice. At the end of the book, she gets her head chopped off, which was pretty intense. There's also a movie version that I never saw because I was like, well, I know how this ends. Head chopped off. Yeah, so she made the fatal mistake of claiming the throne of England for herself, managed to hold on to it for a whole 9 days. One could argue that she was essentially manipulated by her entire family, but then kind of like dug in and was like, no, I am the rightful queen, despite everyone saying, hey, if you kind of like throw yourself on Mary's mercy, you might get out of this. And she's like, no, I am the queen, gosh darn it. And so she was executed publicly at the age of 16 or 17. Yeah, being a teen is rough. It is an extremely sad story. She's a very sympathetic character because she's so young and kind of buffeted by all of these historical forces that you begin to sense maybe she really didn't understand being 16 years old and already married to some guy and kind of queen, but not. It's a really, really sad story that 3 authors, Cynthia Hand, Brodi Ashton, and Jodi Meadows, were like, but what if we made this a comedy, romance, supernatural adventure? And I will admit, when I picked it up, I was like, this is bad. It's a horribly tragic story. And, when I learned that it was about Lady Jane Grey, I was like, what's funny about that? What is funny about that? Turns out a lot. Turns out if you don't kind of take an approach to historical fiction that it needs to be historical and kind of lean a lot heavier on the fiction part of it, it can be very funny. It is what has been called historicized rather than historical fiction, which, again, I'm having a really hard time wrapping my brain around, like, why, other than kind of like rewriting history with less beheadings. But this turned out to be a very super fun read, surprisingly. So it kind of has three main characters, which makes sense because you have three different authors weaving together what is actually a very tightly plotted story that kind of works. So we have Edward VI, who's like a miserable teen king. He's kind of weak, kind of sad, and he's been told that he is dying. Bummer. His advisor says, well, you've got about like a year. So you need to kind of figure out your line of succession as you do. Since he kind of can't get married and produce an heir in that time, he's really got to choose from amongst his family tree of who he is going to place on the throne. So he takes a look at his cousin, Mary. Oh, Mary. Now, Mary is what is called a member of the Verity. So she is an anti-magic, anti-shape changer fundamentalist. Because, of course, why not also have shape changers and magic in this world? Why not? Mary, just like her historical counterpart, is kind of a fundamentalist. And should she come to the throne, she is absolutely going to raise everyone who does magic to the ground and start a civil war. He also has another cousin, Elizabeth, who is kind of like mysterious in her opinions. She's not a member of the Edians, who are the shape changers, nor is she like a proclaimed member of the Verity. She kind of keeps herself to herself, so she's kind of hard to read. So instead, Edward decides to be a real friend and choose his kind of close cousin, Lady Jane Grey, bookworm, fan of the Edians, to be the next queen. However, big problem, she's a lady. So she's going to need a husband stat. Edward kind of like shops around and decides that the best person for the job would be his friend Gifford. Gifford is a noble and he is mostly a horse, in that he is suffering under a curse that in the morning he turns into a horse. And when the sun goes down, he's back to a boy again. It was at this point that I was like, oh, we're in for a ride. He has a curse. Most of the Edians or the shape changers can like do this at will and decide when they want to be horse and not horse. But Gifford has no control over horse form. Sometimes he just horse. Gifford and Edward are like, should we tell her? Should we tell her before like you marry her? And they both think, nah. And so they get married. And then on the wedding night, they get into a big argument because Gifford is a little bit overwhelmed with the whole thing. They go to bed in kind of like a tiff. Jane wakes up next to a horse and is miffed. Edward's got his own problems in that he's trying to eat a pie. But when he tries to eat his pie, his dog growls at him and shoves the pie out of his hand. Pie then turns into a naked lady. No, the pie. Sorry, the dog. Pie would have been so much. Real missed opportunity, Cynthia Hand, Brodi Ashton, and Jodi Meadows. You could have had a pie. A sentient pie. But no, the dog is a naked lady. I mean, it's a lady who could wear clothes, but at the present, she's naked. And she says, don't eat the pie. And he's like, why? Why won't you let me eat the pie? I'm dying. And she's like, you're not dying. You're being poisoned, you idiot. And yeah, sure enough, he is slowly being poisoned by the people who want to take over. And he's like, oh no. And when his trusted advisor comes to kind of like kill him or whatever, he jumps out of the window and turns into a bird. He is also one of the Edians. He has magical shape-changing powers. Jane on the throne is not doing much better because they're like, well, you need to die. And so there's a lot of political shenanigans running around through the Scottish Highlands, people raising armies to fight on the side of Edians or Verities, and, like stuff. Edward meets a lady who's sometimes a fox. So, it's all good. So this is My Lady Jane, which has recently been turned into a Netflix television show, which I'm sure is great. Maybe. I don't know, man. The book is very funny, which again, considering the subject matter seems a little wrong, but they kind of make it work. And it really is like a comedy, romance, adventure, supernatural romp. It's funny. There's really good lines. All the characters are very sympathetic. It is kind of like a delight until you think about it. Until you think about it a little bit nicer. But like, honestly, if this is the way that the story had to end for Lady Jane Grey, maybe the better. Like, married to a part-time horse. At least she still had her head. Yeah. So if you are looking for like a super fun, light, historicized YA, I can recommend this one. It's part of a series that they have gone through and kind of picked out various historical figures and redone them for maximum wackiness. Yeah, it was light. It was fun. I might actually watch. I'm not going to watch the Netflix series. I'm not going to watch the Netflix. I can't watch it. I tried Bodkin. I watched the whole thing and was so angry. I like threw a pillow at someone. So yeah. So give it a shot. It's not as bad as you think. It was actually kind of fun. All right. So that's my book. I'm going to give it to Emma now. Emma, do you have a book where a blancmange turns into a naked gentleman?
I do not. I feel like it'll be hard to follow up with that because my book was like fine. I don't know. It wasn't bad by any means, but it was just a little bit boring compared to like the sheer banana pants that you experienced this week. So yeah, thank you for that, Corene. That was entertaining from start to finish. I am curious to know what your other choice was though, because my book is written by a pair of sisters. So I don't know if we chose the same book. You're saying no? Probably not. Mine's like a young adult graphic novel written by a pair of sisters.
I'm saying definitely not. My book, if I mentioned it here, I can still talk about it later. My book was Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. I listened to the audiobook and I still can't pronounce their last name. I feel very bad. But yeah, no, mine is like a nonfiction.
Definitely different books. But anyway, my book is actually one that was on my books to look forward to list at the very beginning of the year. It's one that was published in January 2024. And like I just said, it's a young adult graphic novel that's co-authored by twin sisters named Shawnelle and Shawnee Gibbs. So the Gibbs sisters have done some comics and graphic novels before. I believe this is their first standalone graphic novel. I think the others were like Marvel series, or they wrote like stuff for Barbie for Mattel. But they mostly do a lot of writing for children's television programs. And they've also done some story writing for reality TV. So they've collaborated together quite a bit in the past. So I think the whole like collaboration process as sisters working together writing worked pretty seamlessly for them. But clearly that's kind of their shtick, is their co-writers that they've done a lot of television work together. Looking at their website, I saw that Shawnelle states in her bio that her goal is to create and produce a legacy of television projects that reflect the magical realism of the African American experience. And as you guys know, I love magical realism. So I was like, wow, this should be a super delightful read for me. So this is what I think is their first standalone graphic novel. It was released in January of 2024, and it's a little bit Ghostbustery, a little bit of like a family history story, but with some paranormal romance peppered in. So for today, I read a book called Ghost Roast that's written by Shawnelle and Shawnee Gibbs, and it's illustrated by Emily Cannon. So the illustrator is different than the authors. So we start with 15-year-old Chelsea, and she's finally content with her life. She lives with her mom in New Orleans and attends an elite prep school on scholarship. So she's kind of the poor kid in the rich kid school. But the rich kids have finally accepted her as one of them, as one of their own. After living years of her life branded as the ghost girl, she's broken out of her social isolation and found herself finally in with the popular kids. And for her, everything is going pretty great, so long as her friends don't discover that her father has a paranormal removal business. He is a ghost hunter. So unfortunately for Chelsea, though, at the beginning of the book, her father has just created a new commercial for his business, and its business is called Ghost Roast. And her friends accidentally discover the commercial and repost it on their social media, where they have thousands of followers. So the commercial goes viral, much to Chelsea's dismay. It's her worst nightmare. All everybody at her school is talking about now is Ghost Roast and this Ghost Roast guy. Chelsea ends up going out with her friends after the last day of school. They go to drink alcohol in a cemetery. They're 15 years old, and they're busted by the cops. Chelsea's mom ends up having to pick her up from jail, and as punishment for her rebellious behavior, she is to work at her dad's ghost roast business all summer long. No more friends, no more going out to parties, no more fun for Chelsea. And all that work that Chelsea put in to not be socially ostracized at school has now gone down the drain now that all everybody can talk about is ghost roast. So working for her dad actually ends up not being quite as bad as she thought. Due to the commercial's viral status online, they're actually now like swamped and overwhelmed with customers. And one customer in particular is a young and wealthy landowner with a mansion in New Orleans, and he wants them to come eradicate the ghosts that have been haunting his ancestral home for over a century. This mansion, however, was formerly a cotton plantation. So, as a young Black woman, Chelsea is immediately uncomfortable and apprehensive to help the family that owns it. Chelsea, her dad, and Ghost Roast's other employee, a teenager named Russ, go to the Harrington mansion to survey it for paranormal activity. Her dad is decked out like a Ghostbuster. He's got these radars that detect ghosts, and he's got like a sort of blaster thing that he calls a roaster, which is pretty funny, that he uses to eradicate them. But her dad can't see ghosts on his own. He requires quite a bit of DIY equipment and technology to be able to find them. And while they're scoping out the estate, however, Chelsea learns that she can see ghosts. She sees 4 ghosts kind of roaming around, 2 animals and 2 people. In particular, she sees an adorable little cat ghost that gets stuck up in a tree, and she can't help but want to save it rather than exorcise it. The cat ghost is quickly scooped up by a ghost of a young man, and a handsome one at that, and they're both whisked away before Chelsea's dad is able to roast them. Chelsea follows the handsome ghost to the mansion's gardens and learns that his name is Oliver Harrington, and he's a former resident of the estate. Oliver does not remember how he died, or how he came to be a ghost or came to be stuck on the property, stuck in like the mortal world. And since Chelsea's the only one who can see him and the only one who's been able to speak with him, she determines that it's her job to find out what happened to Oliver and how he became a ghost in the first place and what she can do to help him before her father destroys him. Thankfully, her mother works for the city's preservation society, so Chelsea digs through archived newspaper clippings and photographs to try to learn more about Oliver's past. And through her research and her conversations with him, she learns that he was a grandson of Mr. Harrington, the owner of the estate, back in the late 1800s. It's like 1860s, 1870s. And that the family were actually slave owners before the Civil War, since they owned a cotton plantation. Oliver, however, has always held abolitionist views. And after the war and after the death of his grandfather, he was named the new heir to the estate, and he employed many of their former enslaved peoples, paying them good salaries to compensate for the work that they were doing. He was actually praised in a lot of New Orleans circles for being so ambitious and so progressive, despite being so young. Yet his politics also gained him a fair share of enemies in kind of a post-Confederate Southern United States. One of those enemies was his uncle, who was a former Confederate soldier, who believed that he should inherit the estate rather than Oliver. There are other twists that are revealed about Oliver's past via Chelsea's research and via conversations that they have with the other ghost on the property. There's the ghost of a Black servant named Marie, who actually raised Oliver following the death of his mother. And Marie unveils secrets of Oliver's ancestry that not only kind of changed Chelsea's perspective of him, but kind of changed the trajectory of the story and how she chooses to help him with his little ghost problem. So this is a cute little paranormal YA fiction. Paranormal YA fiction is very much up my alley. So I enjoyed the ghosts, the mysterious elements of the story. And the story was really cohesive. The Gibbs sisters have clearly done a lot of co-writing before. So working together on that aspect, they work together pretty seamlessly. Like there's not really moments where I notice like, oh, the writing style has changed here. So if you didn't know it was co-authored, you could very much believe that it was just written by one person. It also probably helps that they're twins. My younger siblings are twins, and I describe this phenomenon as twin brain, where they can just like complete each other's sentences and like they understand what the other is thinking without ever having to communicate it. And it's hard to be in the room with them because you can't get a word in edgewise because they're both just gabbing and doing their little twin thing. So I have a feeling like these twins probably get along very well since they can collaborate professionally so well. The art was also really cute. The backgrounds were an especial standout. They were really beautifully illustrated. And I like how the illustrator, Emily Cannon, portrayed the ghosts. They were kind of wispy. The character designs weren't exactly my favorite, but the ghosts were really well done. So I really liked that. And there's also a lot of kind of manga elements to how the characters' faces and emotions are drawn. So that was fun for me to follow through. One complaint I do have about the art style is the layout of the graphic novel is a little iffy at times. The speech bubbles can be a little bit difficult to follow on some pages. Many of them overlapped in awkward places on the panels, so the sequence was a little confusing. And my biggest complaint is actually when the ghosts are speaking, they write the ghosts' dialogue in this really, really pale blue font and with an old-timey sort of typeface. And that was difficult to read. It could have been because I was on my Kobo, so I couldn't, it wasn't very large. But I found the typeface that they use for the ghosts a little bit inaccessible. So that's one complaint I do have about it. But overall, the illustrations were really cute. There was a lot of really well-drawn detail in Chelsea's hair because she has braids. And there's a scene near the beginning where she and her mom are eating breakfast in their bonnets. So there's cute little details like that that I think really enhanced it. And I also really enjoyed the local New Orleans history aspect of the book, especially the history of multiracial abolitionist circles kind of surrounding Oliver's backstory. And so that was a nice touch to add to it because I don't know a lot about that historical context. And I think the authors approached the topic of slavery with a lot of grace. They really honor the struggles of enslaved peoples and former enslaved peoples, and they are able to tell their stories without that becoming the entire plot of the story, and while maintaining these characters' agency, which I thought was really well done. The story was wrapped up a little abruptly. There wasn't a ton of resolution at the end, so I would have enjoyed just a little bit extra. It was kind of a short book, and it was also a graphic novel, so you read it really quickly. And although it was a little bit too much of a Ghostbusters ripoff for me, I thought it was cute and cozy overall. So if you're interested in a fun paranormal story with a little romance in the subplot and some interesting historical elements to it, then you could check out Ghost Roast by Shawnelle and Shawnee Gibbs.
Thank you, Emma, for that. It reminds me last night when I was running around the library trying to find a book for this, I grabbed Julian and it was like, Julian, have you shelved any books with two authors? And then as I was picking a book that I didn't end up reading, he went into the graphic novel section. I was like, come on, most graphic novels are a collaboration between an author and an illustrator, but it was too late. I was headed out the door. But yeah, so very clever. Smart of you to find a two authors, a different illustrator is what you said?
Yeah. So I was going to say, when you said most graphic novels are an author and an illustrator, I feel like that would be cheating because the words are not co-authored. The story is not co-authored. It's you could read any picture book with a different author and illustrator. But no, this one, as I was digging through all these lists of co-authored books when I decided I didn't want to read Good Omens. And I was like, you dum-dum, there was a book in your list at the beginning of the year that has two authors. But yeah, it was good. It was chill. It was fun. It's cute that they're twins. I think it was fun. The writing was seamless. It could have been one author and I would have never known.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. Every podcast is in fact a collaboration between those who do the talking and those who do the listening. See how I'm tying this all together? I've almost finished my cup of tea, so I'm able to talk normally now. So thank you to our dear collaborators in this beautiful journey of Keep It Fictional. We hope that maybe this has inspired you. It's honestly inspired me to read Herman Melville's Pierre more than anything else. I am dying to see what, I don't enjoy his books, except for, what is it? Oh, the one where the guy's at work and he's like,
Yeah. The battle, whatever that one is called. Yeah. With the line, I don't want to. Yeah, that's the one I was like, okay, I feel like I need to read that one. But other than that, whatever that one is called.
Barnaby Scrivener? Something. Anyways, it's, he's given work to do and he's like, I'd rather not. And then the employers are like, what do we do? And so he just kind of sits there looking out the window, which seems like an impressive power move, shall we say. Yeah. So we'll report back on our all Herman Melville all the time podcast. Each of us has to choose one of his books. Someone does Pierre, someone does Bartleby Scrivener, someone does Moby Dick. Whoever has the most time on their hands can do Moby Dick, or cares that much about oil production. Sadie is saying not it. Nope. All right. So we'll report back on that. But thank you so much, everyone, and happy reading. Stay away from the pies.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please tell a fellow book lover about it. You can find a list of all the books we discussed in our show notes. Join us next week for another fun book chat. Until then, keep it fictional.